Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Veriff Voices, the podcast where we talk about fraud, compliance, technology, and all things related to identity verification and restoring trust online. Today's episode is an interesting one, actually. We're going to be talking about financial crime and everything around it, from sort of debanking to anti-money laundering and sort of everything in between. So there's an awful lot to cover. And joining me to do so today is Dr Mariola Marzouk, who is co-founder of Vortex Risk. Dr Marzouk, welcome, first of all. Thanks for joining us. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of intro by sort of way of your kind of your background, your sort of experience, and maybe an explanation of what Vortex Risk is too, please?
Okay, absolutely. So, hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. Well, my background in the regulatory technology space is actually it dates back all the way to about more than a decade ago. So I'm not gonna give dates to tell my age exactly, but it starts. But it started mostly with the very large technology vendors. At that time, there were quite four dominating forces, and one of them was British Aerospace in Engineering that purchased compliance Irish company called Norcom, and then also a NetReveal, and they put these two together to actually come up with a very robust economic crime prevention technology solution that was deployed in many financial institutions across the world, and particularly those operating within Europe. This is where I actually grew my understanding and passion for the economic crime division. So, as you can now kind of pick up, my background in the economic crime space is not law or accounting or, the typical kind of a progression. It is very much from the outsider, I would say, a rebellious perspective that started challenging the way we approach addressing money laundering and counterterrorism financing. I was in love with that particular field and wanted to know more, so I started to study the subject. Originally focusing on just generic economic crime problems, but then narrowing down to trade-based money laundering because that was told to me that it was the most pervasive and difficult challenge to face. So I was always surprised. Okay, but we know that is most pervasive, and we have all of this stuff in place. Well, how come we are not doing much about it? So I started researching it, then decided to do it under the academic umbrella. So did the PhD in trade-based money laundering, focus on the use of surveillance technologies to detect it within financial institutions. In the meantime, I also work for a RegTech technology provider to kind of understand how the alternative providers approach the problem, work for the consulting agency as well, and now work quite a lot with non-profit organizations and investigative journalists and all sorts of technology providers to help them expand their knowledge around what is actually money laundering, how do we measure it, and the what sort of effects we had. And quite frankly, Vortex Risk was established as a method to show that the current approaches or current understanding of money laundering problems are not robust enough to help us detect it, because criminals are frankly very rationally thinking, risk-averse criminals who actually deploy, I would say, risk-based approaches to mitigating getting caught. So Vortex Risk methodology was created to actually imitate this rational thinking criminal that has no obstacles, understands the rules, knows how the industry works, and doesn't get caught. Because we don't catch anyone, since we'll quote you constantly that only 1% is ever detected and brought to justice. So clearly we are not doing very well.
I love that. Thank you. That's a great introduction, and I love to hear those stories of how people came into this industry because, like you say, people come from all different types of directions, and we've had guests on the podcast that came from that kind of CFO financial background where they could sort of see the impact that the crime was having and want to do something about it. We've had folks from the law enforcement side, and I think your route in is incredibly interesting, actually. And let's get into sort of the financial crime prevention for business sort of point to this. Then I think you kind of intimated in your intro actually what your feelings are about this, but I'd like to explore it a little bit more because I think we've had, over the last 30 years or so, maybe more than that, we've kind of this regulatory sort of framework has developed as sort of a way of sort of policing regulations. But there's a really interesting debate in the certainly when we're seeing it in the US at the moment actually about this kind of, is there a need to kind of peel back regulation in order to allow businesses to grow? And it's kind of this kind of idea that sort of seems to be quite pervasive in sort of political circles on both sides of the Atlantic, actually, not just in the US. But is there a case, do you think, that we need to sort of revisit the anti-money laundering sort of regime that's in place at the moment? Because as you said, is it really sort of fit for purpose in what it's sort of supposed to be doing?
Well, we can approach this question from three different angles. Number one is, well, we've put a lot of money laundering regulations in place across various different jurisdictions. Of course, most of this is driven by the Financial Action Task Force and by their recommendations. This organization was put in place, strongly influenced by the United States of America. It was put in place because US decided to fight the war on drugs. So many of the stipulations that had been driving the FFT with does originate from drug enforcement. Nonetheless, the regulations expanded. We actually had a similar situation around regulatory pressure back in 1980s, when actually we felt too much of business world was saying that they feel almost like a regulatory state, too much regulatory pressure. And there was a kind of reassessment of how the regulations should be written and applied, and how much, what extent governments should have into the private sector. And they came up with the idea that maybe they should borrow a principle of the risk-based approach from businesses and use it to drive the regulatory stipulations as well. So this risk-based approach was introduced. So in a high level, the regulations are not bad, right? They are there to serve the purpose. They are there to help us understand how to think about potential nefarious activities in our abuse, and maybe pay attention to certain red flags and so forth. So they are not bad. They become bad when we are constantly plastering one on top of the other without considering the effect it has on the legitimate economy. And that has become a challenging situation for small and medium enterprises that are getting caught in a net of these regulatory stipulations just by the default of being dynamic and growing, interacting, because they are not when you set up a business and you interact, you're not going to think about, oh, I need to design it in such a way that it doesn't trigger AML regulations. They don't think about that. They just, come up with ideas and they start working. And in the meantime, they start triggering some red flags that are then very rudimentarily policed. And this is the second point. Well, we have the regulations. They are not bad. They are there. They are supposed to serve the purpose. Yeah, some of them are maybe need to be reviewed. Maybe we need to scale down on them. Definitely, there should be a review of AML regime. We should be doing a review of any regime or any policy or anything we do. But then there is a matter of policing. Well, you create the regulation, that's one thing, but can you police it? And who polices these regulations? And do we actually have resources to police those regulations? And it's clear that we don't. We don't. The law enforcement, who's obviously the number one institutions, government institutions to be policing, are struggling with financial resources, technology resources, human resources, and the knowledge to actually police money laundering. So, but we can see it by numbers. How much do we like in the UK over between 2021 2022? As far as I remember, we've confiscated around 400 million pounds. Well, how much money laundering is done in the UK? Estimated 100 billion. Well, that's very small. So obviously, this policing is not working very well. But then there are other policing organizations that have the government mandate for executing AML laws, and for example, these are the regulators. So in the UK, we have the FCA. The FCA is actually doing much better than the law enforcement in policing the regulations. They are fining banks right and left. They also, I think, 3 banks in 2022. I think we're fine about to get collectively about 400 million as well. But policing here where the FCA polices, it polices organization supervisors, whether they comply with the law. So it's not focused on the criminals, it's focused on the institutions. And then you have all the other policing actors that enter this space to kind of fill in the gap that government institutions are struggling with. So we have accounting, big four companies, and consulting companies. You have AML knowledge providers. All of them perform some function of policing of the laws. So, for example, consulting companies frequently receive the outsourcing of the FCA reviews of institutions. They help provide knowledge. They help provide resources to conduct the reviews. To even test what sort of AML systems they have in place. So in a nutshell, they are also a policing organization that receive an outsourcing mandate. RegTech organizations are also a policing actor. All right, they provide technology not only to the regulated sector like banks, but also to the regulators themselves and also to the law enforcement in order to help, streamline some of these policing processes. So if you have so many now actors in the chain, what happens is that typically each one starts to apply the policing in a way that suits their agendas. And it becomes a problem when those agendas are not aligned, right? And what are the agendas of the private institutions is, of course, being profitable, making money. So this is where ineffectiveness happens. So even when we talk about the public-private partnership as yet another form of policing, we two now come together. Well, how can this be effective if all the actors in the chain have different agendas, different priorities, different set of skills, and quite frankly, different incentives, right? And and it becomes almost like an impossible, wicked problem to solve. Further, if one in that chain runs on absolute state of fear of breaking the law, so it's just an impossible circle to flawlessly navigate. So I would answer it from this three perspective, whether this is actually effective and whether we should be scaling down on the laws. Maybe we should just revisit how we police them and incentives to police them amongst the actors that we've introduced into the system.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think what's interesting as well is that given kind of where we are now as well in the market and the way as a sort of society has developed with sort of digitalization and a number of sort of players coming into this space that could have kind of loosely be termed sort of regulatory tech providers or RegTech, these kind of businesses, of which Veriff is one as well, I should say. So it's we kind of work in the KYC AML space as well with our customers. So into this kind of, if you like, an imperfect system that we've got, you now have this sort of layer of businesses who can help other businesses navigate that sort of imperfect system. It's a very sort of interesting way of developing it, I suppose. And do you think that the businesses like Veriff who are in this space, do you think we're sort of somewhat limited in the amount that we can sort of help return trust to the internet, which is our kind of motto and the thing that drives us? Do you think we're limited in that because of the system that we're trying to work in, and some of those limitations that you just referenced in your last answer there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There is a great limitation put on any actor within the policing system because it is driven by the regulatory stipulations that are then driven, or the compliance with those stipulations is driven by fear of not complying. That has consequences. They obviously cost money from financial, fine perspective, but then you have the whole avalanche of remediation that needs to go through, and that goes for years on, and you have to hire lots of people to help you with that. You have lots of monitors that come and check everything. It's a paralyzing situation in any institution that obviously most of innovation will be put on hold at that time. So it is a consequential kind of a limitation placed on any policing actor that has to run on fear. There is no innovation if you are, if you operate in an environment of fear. You can't innovate. What you're going to be doing is mitigating the risk of getting fined, or mitigating the risk of getting something wrong or being punished. You are going to mitigate the risk around you. You are not going to be thinking as a priority that I need to innovate. And of course, that creates a lot of tensions between compliance departments, right, and the business departments, because people who work in a business departments in many institutions, apart from perhaps I would say very large financial institutions, but in almost the others, will be not appreciating actually the fearful environment, the restricted environment that compliance need to work towards, and therefore the decisions they need to make in purchasing technologies, for example, right? Because what are they going to be purchasing? Because their incentive is I need to protect my institutions from fines, remediation, reputation, and damage, and all of this. So I need to comply with the law. That's my number one priority. So if they choose a RegTech provider or any technology provider, whatever, they will be incentivized to help them tick those regulatory boxes. That's what it's going to be. So they are not going to be venturing out with some innovative thinking around how to detect criminality, because this is not what they are incentivized to do. They are incentivized to comply with the law. They are incentivized to file SARS, not to find money launderers. So what the RegTech is going to be developing in order to actually sell the solutions or to get funding, well, they have to develop something that the market wants. What it wants is to comply with the regulations. And quite frankly, I've been in the RegTech industry, and I know that everyone in there is entered that space fully motivated to detect criminality. That's why we went in there to do. And all of a sudden, as we start evolving, our innovations and ideas are being squashed. And we start to be framed into this AML framework of ticking boxes, and many people then get frustrated. At least my generation of the RegTech workers, we started to get frustrated with how the system works. And what do? You try to jump around different vendors to find out maybe someone else does it much better. Maybe they are more free to innovate, only to realize this is not the case. So you kind of give up and say, well, this is just how it works. Well, I couldn't. So I stepped out. I said, no, I don't accept this, because the technology is out there. It's great, and we could do so much with it. And the people behind the tech have great, aspirations, but they are limited. They are limited in knowledge, limited in the regime, limited of what the banks want. And really, and if you look at the business side of any institution, well, they look at the compliance function and all of this tick boxing as they see, all this risk aversion, um, and they marvel, how are we actually going to move the business forward? They don't understand that you just must do those things. They apply this critical thinking mind and say, well, I wouldn't launder money this way. I don't see this risky. And they're right. Yes, they probably in that way they wouldn't, a criminal wouldn't launder money this way. Like, for example, in trade finance. The regulators and the regime says trade finance has high risk product, and the business side goes like, how is that? How do you consider this high risk if I have all of these controls in place versus I see other products that have less controls in place? So those minds start to collude, or not collude. They start to clash, and you can see that this is how the criminal mind as well is clashing with the ML regime. The criminal mind being the business oriented, innovative, wanting to accomplish their purpose, and they understand the compliance wall right there. So it's a flip side when they can navigate versus in a real business scenario, they don't understand each other. So yeah, it is restricting, and we should be reconsidering the AML regime and how it actually impacts, what we have designed. Let's not say it's bad, but how we've designed it, how we police it, and how does it incentivize all the actors to innovate and enable growth. I think nobody has actually thought about that. It was just more like, Panama paper happens. What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to make everyone look at beneficial ownership. Tick, done. Well, have you considered actually, how's that going to impact everyone? How's that going to be policed and executed? Who is going to actually suffer? I don't think they think that far. So we have the consequences like now that rectors are, constrained in what they can actually do, how they can use technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you used the phrase sort of ticking the box a couple of times. I noticed in the couple of answers you've given already, and I think that's maybe the root of this problem, isn't it? That it's seen as something that is a process that has to go through as a business cost. We have to have people in place to do this stuff. We have to collect a lot of data on our customers to do it, and all of a sudden it becomes a bit of a burdensome thing to have to go through, when it shouldn't really be like that. Really, what you're doing is protecting your business from crime, from fraud, protecting your customers as well, and that should is a noble thing that should be encouraged, as opposed to something that has a sort of a negative stigma and connotation to it. So one of the things I'm keen to talk about actually is this sort of concept of debanking, which is, it seems to me, a kind of a quick, in some ways a catch-all term, but it seems to be a kind of a quick way for financial services organizations to deal with this problem of, if they have sort of accounts that are a concern of theirs, they can just shut them down, and then they don't have to worry about them anymore, and that box ticking exercise is kind of then sort of null and void. Is that something that you've seen a lot more of? Kind of, what does it mean for customers in practice as well, this kind of practice, do you think?
The concept of the banking has been highlighted by the researchers long ago, almost at the very beginning of the AML regime being created. So the academics already, gave their opinions around where is that gonna go, right? So they had this forward-thinking mindset that this is probably going to end up in the debunking and the risking of businesses, individuals that have done nothing wrong, because it's so rudimentally set and it's so poorly policed. We are just not equipped to police this effectively. It's just surprising that it is just now being talked about. So it's, we've accumulated this problem for 10 years, nothing has been done, and now it's starting to show its ugly head. And in many cases, this always happens. It's like in fraud. Fraud was highlighted 30 years ago by the researchers. That's going to be a huge problem. It's going to overpower any other problem that we are facing. And it was almost like, now we cannot hear this. We can't see the futuristic perspective you are seeing. Well, there's a reason why there are researchers, because they can do that. And you should be using the data and the recommendations that they give you to actually brainstorm this possibility. Now we have this humongous problem, and it's growing even bigger because we are all digitally connected, right? Again, now it's just sticking there, the ugly head. The same was actually on trade-based money laundering when I was researching, and I realized, well, actually, the researchers since 1960s, even before, they were highlighting that trade can be abused, and this is how you can abuse it. And this is what sort of reasons entities, individuals abuse trade. And it wasn't until FFTF called it out. It was years after. But when what happened? Well, nothing happened. It's still one of the most prevalent problems that we have. So it is just astounding how slowly we move to respond to knowledge, which then creates these balloons that are just now overwhelming for us. And yes, I've been hearing a lot about the risking, but it doesn't mean that the risking has just, started. This has been going on for years. It's just now being, shown. It's just now that entities are starting to report this problem. So, for example, I think it was in 2023 that Barclays went on to a spree of debunking institutions that they considered to be high risk according to ticking AML boxes, and highly expensive to tick those boxes, not very profitable. So why on earth would you keep them? I'm a business. I need to make business decision. Can you fold them for this? I just struggle folding it for this. They made a business decision. I mean, you put these obligations on us. It's all about ticking those boxes. This is expensive. We need to hire an army of people, have great technologies. It's just, and they are not even delivering a good value. So we're just gonna de-risk them. And who was the risk? Well, for example, a church choir, or a charitable organization that was collecting money, and all of a sudden, had their bank account frozen, and they can't pay for electricity bills, for water, for rent, and then basically that's it, gone. They're just done. Steam train restoration group, of passionate people, and lots of charities get obviously debunked. Quite frankly, in a good research that was conducted, and they about charities in almost 60 countries were reviewed. 90% listed AML and counterterrorism regulations as hindering their development. And equally, in Spain, there were reports of double digits growth in reported cases of debunking, where the entities are just complaining about their bank accounts being closed. In the UK, we had this very quick report written, kind of a reactive, data provided by banks, which was 144,000 businesses that suffered the consequences of the banking. So it's these are just bits and pieces floating here and there, that they're just, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot going on underneath. Yeah, and then you think about it, if those businesses get their bank accounts closed, That's it. I mean, you can't function. And there was one, I don't know, was that one RegTech provider actually did a report using machine learning tech, and they said that, oh, so what, that the business, one bank closes a bank account for a small and business enterprise, they can just go to another one, open it there. Well, no, they can't. And the fact that you actually thought of that indicates that you don't have much understanding about the problem in which you operate. So that will bring to another problem, within the industry, that we know very little. And the actors that enter the policing space also know very little. And quite frankly, stop caring about how the attack actually impacts others. But no, you can't just open another bank account. And many small and medium enterprises are just honest businesses. And when they are asked the question, why are you moving? They say, because the other one closed my bank account. And I don't understand why. What did I do wrong? Because they don't think this way. They are just, working. They are providing charitable benefits. They are not thinking, oh, am my operations trigger any AML red flags? My gosh, it would be awful if this is how we need to be, working in this world. Like, oh, we need to make sure I don't trigger AML laws.
Do you think that that the anti-money laundering kind of RegTech solutions as a whole, I'm not necessarily talking about for individually, but the kind of group of businesses, if you like, that have developed in this space to kind of address some of these problems that I think we've covered here today, do you think they're fit for purpose? I mean, I'm keen to sort of hear your take on that too. And do you think that is there anywhere that these sort of RegTech providers fall short, and kind of what would be sort of the solution there for them? Do you think?
So maybe let's break it into two. What's the purpose? One. And therefore we can decide whether they are fit for purpose, right? So if the purpose is to help comply with the regulations, well, there's great innovation in how to streamline a lot of processes that are really burdensome for humans to perform. Gathering the data, right? Verifying customer identities online, refocusing attention of investigators in cases that need far more thinking in human judgment. So, no, or checking against sanctions. There are parts of it that are absolutely crucial. Without the RegTechs, it would be, I can't even imagine. How can you comply with those regulations when you are a larger institution doing everything manually? No, you need a technology in place. So if the purpose is to comply with the regulations, right? But if the purpose is to detect money laundering and prevent criminality, then it's not fit for purpose. It's not fit for purpose because how can we say it is if for 30 years we have done no impact or very little impact? Actually, we don't have any data on what is the impact on preventing criminality. The FFTF was, for example, critiqued many times over that they can't show how those recommendations or guidelines that they produce have any effect on detecting criminality because the numbers are going up, or at least they stay the same. So if we've been quoting that money laundering has been in 3 trillions since 1999 and till today, now I think it's now we're quoting it's 5% of the global GDP, which is obviously bigger than trillion, then it's going up. Unless we can say that, oh, we got all of these calculations wrong, because by the way, it's possible since there is very little research on money laundering. And we are struggling to quantify that problem because its nature is hidden, right? So it's very difficult to quantify it. I can tell you that there is lots of academic work that has been done to quantify money laundering, and some of this does not point to this trillions, but point much, much, much smaller numbers. But of course, we have taken the trillion as the one that is guiding us because then it creates the need for the industry exists. And if we flip this and think, well, there's only two possibilities. Either we are doing okay, and money laundering is actually not such a big problem as we are thinking it is. Or if it is indeed such a big problem, then we are doing very poorly since it still continues to be such a big problem. So yeah, that depends which purpose we're talking about. Now, but I need to also overlay it with the veil of what the marketing says of the RegTech providers, right? None of them say, we are here to help you comply with the regulations. No, all of them say, we are here to help you detect, prevent financial crimes, right? But that's not what you're doing. I mean, and if you are doing that, then you must be grossly ineffective since nothing is changing. And another one, there is no such thing as financial crimes. right? It's economic crimes. What is financial crimes? Where did they get this term from? No, they're economic crimes that are financially motivated. Economic crimes. What's financial crime? How what's, for example, if I traffic a human being, what crime did I commit? Financial crime? I mean, that's not a financial crime. I didn't do financial crime. I traffic human beings, right? If I steal IP data for the purpose of enriching myself, well, that's a different story, right? If I committed money laundering, well, that is, a different story. But if I sell drugs, they committed financial crime. So it shows lack of understanding of the problem, and again, it's not to fault them for this in a sense because there isn't much written on this problem anyhow. Really, we've been struggling, and in my experience with trade-based money laundering, this is even smaller. When I was conducting my research, and of course I had to do literature review, I found so little. I was shocked how little I found, but all I found was actually academics pointing out to we don't have much written. Actually, we don't research this problem very well, and most certainly, you don't see much. I actually don't think I've seen any the research of the problem of the money laundering problem from the private sector perspective, like RegTechs. I don't see individuals behind RegTechs or working RegTech space going after the research. So it's very much running on a very rudimental, superficial kind of knowledge. So we are not going to serve the purpose of detecting criminality if we're not understanding the money laundering problem. Um, so yeah, I suppose in a more rounded way, purpose of regulatory compliance. Yeah, okay, we're doing okay. No, we could do much better in detecting criminality, money laundering. No, we are absolutely failing there, and we will continue if we continue on this path. So I hope that gives you something to think about.
No, I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely. I think somewhere along the line, the preventing crime has become decoupled from the regulations, right? I think the regulations were intended originally to fight crime, but I think that somewhere along the line there's been a disconnect, and now it's as you said so many times, it's kind of a box ticking exercises for lots of organisations where they're just complying with regulations and they don't really give much thought to what the cause and effect of that all is when it comes to the crime part of it. Do you think? Obviously, we're seeing a lot more. Just staying on this theme of the sort of the RegTech space, we're seeing a lot more, artificial intelligence, and the impact of that sort of is speeding things up in terms of innovation and new products to market and new solutions and that kind of thing. Do you think? It's a bit of sort of phrasing this question in an odd way, but do you feel like that? Artificial intelligence could be a way for us to bridge that gap and bring that sort of where it has sort of decoupled the fighting crime aspect from the regulations. Do you think there is a way to bring that together using the sort of the speeding up of technology that we're seeing today?
But again, I'll separate technology, as a tech and capabilities of what it can offer from actually how it is applied. Yeah, we have great innovations in technology that are used in all sorts of different domains of industries, right? We have AI that is applied in medicine. We have AI applied in aviation. We have linking and networks and parties in social science in general to understand problems of, let's say, children consuming a lot of drugs and why that is and how they source it and so forth. So these areas of studies exist and they're applied in all sorts of domains and they have great effects there. So that's that's tech. It's great. It's and then us as a human beings can really come up with incredible utilizations of those tools to improve the purpose that we want this to be applied for. Well, when we have this problem with the purpose, right? We have this problem with the regulations. While we're ticking boxes for regulatory compliance and applying AI, what sort of limited innovation is there? Well, we're going to do things more or less the same, just faster and cheaper. Well, great. What's a great, application of AI and human innovation. Just great. So, yeah, I would split on that front. Now, how can it help in a AML space? Well, it can't. It won't. It won't unless it will do even poor job in complying with the regulations, because yeah, it's just going to tick those boxes. It will tick those boxes because that's what it is designed to do. It's designed to follow that regime. That regime has consequences. The policing of it is poorly conducted. So the consequences are de-risking and highlighting individuals that are not criminals, and in the same time, criminals fully knowing how to evade those flags and running through undetected. So if the AI is fully focused on strictly obeying by these rules, because that's what banks buy, because that's what banks must, otherwise they're in fear of breaching the regulations, well, then innovation is very limited there. But if we were to apply AI on detecting criminality, we could do much better there. However, we have another problem, which is our poor understanding of what actually money laundering is and how it's done, because it's clearly not done the way the regulators tell us it's done, since we are not detecting anything. So those criminals must be doing something else to evade all those detections. So unless we expand the underlying knowledge about how money is laundered and maybe just have much more collaboration between the business side and the compliance side, just brainstorming how one could abuse the financial institutions and its products, then maybe we'll do better in it. Maybe if the researchers, had more um, incentives actually to research the subject, to challenge it, then we would just grow the knowledge about how in practice this happens. And therefore, we can then let AI run on that knowledge. Because right now, if you apply AI to run on existing human understanding of money laundering, then we are not going to find anyone because we are not understanding the money laundering. So, it's I suppose it's really empowering the human creativity and thinking to drive the AI rather than some high powers deciding that these are the rules of playing with money and this is what AI must be detecting. Well, when the criminals don't have those rules, therefore they innovate and we are restrained. So, yeah, I would say absolutely tech can help, but just unleash the creativity of humankind. Just let it think, let it brainstorm how the money laundering can be done. You know, let it challenge and feel that they can challenge. That doesn't exist. So, unfortunately, we'll just go round and round in circle with underutilizing the great technology innovations that we have. So,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when AI is always at its best when it's used in conjunction with some human creativity. I think just left to its own devices, we don't really see much in the way of innovation. We just, as you said, things just get faster and and cheaper. But really, there is a creativity element which is kind of missing to it. And I'm very conscious of time here, so I just want to sort of wrap up with a couple of last questions actually. But you kind of have indicated, I think, what your answer to the next question would be in your last answer actually. But what do you think some of the top priorities for businesses and regulators in this fight against financial crime should be? If we're sort of, if you had a perfect, if you had a magic wand and you could sort of wave it and sort of it would change everything instantly, what would be the main priorities for you in terms of what businesses should be doing, what regulators should be doing as we sort of move forward and through this kind of changing sort of economic crime landscape?
so I would say maybe the regulators should be splitting the way they describe, or maybe stop using the term financial crime because it's really highly confusing. Because really, what is that? And focus on the two distinct ones. So you have financially motivated non-economic crimes. This would be human trafficking, right? Exploitation of children. That would be drug trafficking. That would be gun sales and so forth. They are financially motivated non-economic crimes. And then you have economic crimes, which is money laundering, fraud, IP theft. So these are the things I am going to create a situation that is designed for me to enrich myself or to cause you a financial harm. And these two are obviously intertwined, right? Because financially motivated non-economic crime generate proceeds. I am doing that to have money. And once I have this money uh, generated from this activity, it is illicit. I committed a crime. I need to enjoy it, right? So what I do, then I move to economic crimes, right? And I want to launder these proceeds. So maybe split these two. And also I suppose, put the same weight of importance on the both. Because human trafficking, let's say, we just picked on this one, is very visible because it has some human suffering attached to it. And it all elicits emotions in us. We can see victims, we can hear their stories, and we suffer with them listening to those stories, right? It's visible. When you talk to people about money laundering, they feel detached from it. They're like, so people do it. What's the harm? There is some harm. Or corruption, so everyone does corruption. That's kind of the way of a business. It's become normalized. There's no victim. It doesn't elicit this, emotional response. Because of that, there is a different, obviously, weight put on this, right? This two subject. So because the money laundering economic crimes have lesser kind of a weight put on because it's not visible, what also happens is that media picks up different stories. They will pick up something that has a human factor, human element. They can report on human beings being abused, human beings suffering. That sells. This is in the front news. Money laundering, well, not many people are going to read an article about money laundering, but they're going to read about people dying because the boat collapsed, right? They will read about this, even though these two are intertwined, they're connected. You can't solve one problem without solving the other. So maybe just that, just reframe this and make the society understand that this economic crimes drive why the financially motivated economic crimes are successful, and they will continue being successful. Because when you start putting the weight on economic crimes, money laundering, then the research is going to kick in. People will start getting interested. People will start innovating. It will become people will start understanding the problem. And when that happens, people will want change. They will demand change. They will be far more knowledgeable about proposing change and pushing the governments. They will understand the connection between one and the other. So I would say, from the regular perspective, maybe focus this way and then just use those vague, bizarre terms of financial crime, because it's like, what falls into it, right? So maybe just that bit would be I would say a very important one, because at the end, quite frankly, nothing is ever going to change unless we human beings stand up and say, this is not right. And you government that I've elected you, I want you to tackle this problem. But if they are only going to give us information about financially motivated non-economic crimes that have victims attached to them, then we are only going to see that this is the problem. If they are only going to be telling us that knife crime is the problem, and we need to be scared of that, again, fear-driven kind of tactics, then we are not going to understand that, well, knife crime is serious, of course, but economic crimes are far, far, far bigger and have far bigger consequences than a knife crime. It's far bigger problem, but we're not focusing there. Of course, it's easier to focus on knife crime, right? It buys you votes. Look, I've stopped that. What did you stop? You just banned selling knives? Ah, well done. That solved the problem. The kid will find some other tool. So it's about the right focus on the right problem, which we don't have.
Well, okay, let's that's what you would like to see happen in the sort of future. What do you think will happen? I guess let's try and get a prediction out of you for as 2025 unfolds. What do you think will be will there be any of these changes in the landscape? Do you think, or do you think we're largely in for much of the same?
The answer, I'm questioning whether it's largely the same. It's just because of the American initiatives, and also because I think even in the UK we started recognizing, government started recognizing that maybe what they call deregulation needs to take place. Well, unwinding all those regulations is going to be challenging, but yes, I suppose we might not see exactly the same challenges, but a different set. But no, maybe just zooming out. Are we going to reduce money laundering? No, we are not going to reduce money laundering. Even if we do some reshuffling of these AML rules, do some deregulation, we might just unlock some of the benefits for legitimate work. I would love to see that happen. So I would love to see deregulation on reassessment of those regulations from the perspective lifting this bit would enable growth and innovation. I would love to see that. But is it actually going to reduce money laundering? No. I don't think it's going to reduce money laundering because we don't understand what money laundering is in the first place. So let's study that first. Let's study how money laundering is conducted in reality, and then we can put a better AML laws and principles to help us address it. But right now, lifting some of the regulations from the perspective of where it would enable creativity in the industry, well, that's the right approach to go. Since this AML regulations, the way we police them, don't find money laundering anyhow. So, yeah, I would say from just apply that lens of the future.
Yeah, I figured that might be the case actually. But look, I think the only really thing that can change this is as you say, just a lot of good work that's being done by people like yourself, and and I think your organisation as well is kind of shining a light on this at least, and at least sort of pushing the government, pushing businesses to be better. So I think that's that's the sort of the positive to take, that is there are a lot of people invested in sort of in improving this situation. And yeah, as you say, I mean, you mentioned a couple of times there, it's important to think of the victims of all of this stuff on a very human level, because I think when you do, it sort of reframes this problem entirely. If you're just talking about dollars and cents or pounds and pennies, it can be a bit abstract, I think, and people are sort of, they just shrug their shoulders. But I think if you can sort of frame it in a way that does have a human element to it, I think it's all of a sudden a very different problem to solve, isn't it?
Yes, and then we in a AML world, we tend to think that everyone understands money laundering and feels how negative it is for the world. But if you ask a person on the street about money laundering and how negative it is and what they think about it, and say everyone does this. They normalize this problem. It just so there are bigger things we need to think about. The blood on the streets. Yes, but where that blood came from, someone paid. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's a good point for us to finish on actually, and I think there's lots more that we could have talked about today. So I think we know I'd love to have you back on one day in the future, so we can sort of talk about how this has developed over time, because I think hopefully there will be some changes, and maybe a year from now or something the landscape will all look very different. But I think we are at sort of time now, so I just want to just draw a line to that. So Dr. Marzouk, first of all, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. It was really good, really entertaining, and lots of really interesting stuff in there. I think there's we could have talked for another hour at least on some of these things. So thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate it.
well, thank you very much for having me, Chris. And yeah, it was very enjoyable.
Thanks very much, and thanks everybody for listening. This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.